Welcome to the CEC Report for November 21st, 2014. I'm Elisa Barwick, and with me today is Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Hi, Elisa.
And in today's show, bail-in agenda stalled. Use BRICS momentum to bury it. And secondly, China and India invite Australian cooperation in BRICS development agenda. So firstly, bail-in agenda stalled. Use BRICS momentum to bury it. Now the G20 in Brisbane happened last weekend, finally, and this somewhat marks a phase shift in our organising, the CEC, because we've spent the last year organising to stop the policy push for bailing in banks, as happened in Cyprus.
Which was going to be finalised at this event.
Yeah, that was the deadline where it was meant to be finalised. And just to remind our viewers of how that deadline came about, which is useful, the head of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who doubles as the head of the Bank for International Settlements Financial Stability Board, was given the job of getting a global bail-in policy through. And on the 24th of October in 2013, which was more than 2 months before Australia assumed the chairmanship of the G20, Carney gave a speech in London. He said, "Our aim is to complete the job by the next G20 summit in Brisbane." Now, the speech he gave was titled, "The UK at the Heart of a Renewed Globalisation." And in that speech, he bragged that almost half of all the over-the-counter derivatives worldwide turnover takes place in the City of London, which he described as the heart of the global financial system. So this bail-in agenda in that speech was couched as part of his vision of a new world economic order. But that proposal was not accepted at the G20. It was not completed, and in fact has been eclipsed. The G20 marks the point at which that agenda of London's was eclipsed by another agenda, which is that of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, which have been promoting the notion of mutual collaboration for the benefit of all, funding development programs, which particularly became prevalent at the time of the July meeting this year in Fortaleza, Brazil.
And they said after that meeting that they intended to take their agenda to the BRICS, to the G20 in Brisbane.
Exactly.
And it definitely overshadowed the bail-in part of it.
Now, what I want you to do, though, is review the changes that this bail-in proposal went through during that period, because it was watered down significantly, but it still, nonetheless, didn't get legs at the G20.
Yeah, so well, first of all, before we go through the specifics, just to remind people, this is supposed to be the solution to too big to fail banks, but it's a solution that does not involve making them less big. They are too big.
Less too big to fail.
Make them less big, split them up, make them smaller institutions, and then when they fail, then they won't blow up the system. But of course, they don't want to do that. They want to keep these too big to fail banks as too big. It's just shift where they shift the risk. And they're saying, oh, the risk shouldn't be on taxpayers via government bailouts. We're going to put the risk somewhere else. And they were planning to put it on depositors, right? That poor innocent depositors who put their money in the bank for safekeeping would be told, oh, sorry, it's gone now. Keeping the bank going was more important than honouring your deposit. So there's been a big stink about that, which we've helped lead around the world since March 2013 when it was done in Cyprus. And in the face of that opposition, they really have lost their nerve, because they know that even if you're an oligarch who thinks you're born to rule, you've got to be conscious that, if the masses ever turn on you, right, then you've lost it, right? Nothing's going to stop that. So what they've done is they made a conscious decision, I believe, to change the tenor of what they're discussing. We've had total 12 months of denial from the government that deposits were ever in the firing line, yet the week before the event, the G20 event, when Mark Carney announced the finalised form of bail-in, he made a big show. He specified what we're doing will not involve deposits. Right? Why do you have to say that if as Joe Hockey says, it was never to involve deposits? No, because of course it was always going to involve deposits. So they've come up with something else, which is bail-inable bonds. And the bottom line with bail-in, every bank too big to fail bank will be told, you've now got to sell a certain number of bonds to investors who will know in advance that if you get in trouble, their bonds, their part of the ownership of you will become worthless, or converted into equity, which is virtually worthless anyway because it's an equity in a failing institution. Shares in the bank. So then the question became who they're going to sell it to. And insiders in the Bank of England apparatus were very frank, including former Deputy Governor Paul Tucker, saying, well, you can't, when banks sell these bonds that will become worthless in a crisis, they can't sell them to each other because then the risk stays in the banking system. They've got to get it out of the banking system. That means they've got to sell them to pension funds, which we call superannuation funds in Australia, and insurance funds. And then he said, and that means that the risk will be borne by households because it's your retirement savings, or you think you're insured for fire and theft and whatever, and it's your insurance fund that'll say, sorry, we can't pay out, when you need it because we've lost all our money on bail-inable bonds. So ordinary people, were being bailed in anyway. And just quickly, who are these? What sort of institutions are we protecting here? Well, these same disgusting criminal operations have just been caught again, rigging the foreign exchange market in London. It's the same old banks. HSBC, Royal Bank of Scotland, Union Bank of Switzerland, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup have all been caught out and fined, and the fines are a joke to them because they got revenue of hundreds of billions of dollars. They've been caught out and fined for rigging the foreign exchange market in London. And this is the biggest market in the world, $5.3 trillion worth. Half of it is done in London. All the dirtiest deals are done in London because it's this deregulated zone that people like Mark Carney are determined to keep that way. And it's that, the media will tell you it's rogue traders. It's not rogue traders because it's the same banks that have been involved in every damn scandal that's been rubbed in our face for the last decade. They should have been broken up. Half of their executives should probably be rotting in jails by now, right? And they're not. They've all got away with it scot-free, and these are the institutions that are being protected by this latest bail-in scam. So the good news was, when he took it to the G20, hoping to get everyone to sign on the dotted line, according to the communique, there was an annex there that had some language that allowed us to read between the lines. Although the official communique welcomed Mark Carney's plan, we welcome his plan, they had to admit, well, we didn't finalise it now. We will have to subject it to public consultation and a rigorous quantitative impact assessment and further refinement before any final measure is agreed to by the 2015 summit, i.e. a year from now. And this is the key bit that tells me who the obstacle was. The impact analyses will include consideration of the consequences of this requirement on banks in emerging markets and state-owned banks. And of course, the members of the G20 that dominate emerging markets and are the biggest users of state-owned banks are the BRICS. Specifically, countries like China and India are the biggest emerging markets. Russia, China and India are the biggest users of state-owned banks in the world, right? And so it was obviously their questioning of the Financial Stability Board saying, hang on, what does this mean for our institutions, that made them say, okay, well, we'll have to put this off for another year. So that was good. Good on the BRICS. We will keep fighting bail-in, though, in all its forms, and we'll keep the reviewers posted. Because
although it wasn't accepted by the G20 as a global body, that doesn't mean they'll give up. Clearly there will be the pursuing of legislations within various nations, and we've seen the Bank of England...
Well, there has to be, because they're determined to keep these banks as too big to fail.
Well, that's right. And so the Bank of England has just released a report over in the UK on bank resolution directives, which spells this out, and of course that's Mark Carney leading the way with that. So they're not going to keep pushing, they are going to keep pushing for this. Now, what we'll talk about in the next segment is our next phase of the fight and how we'll take that up. Welcome back to the CEC report. So we were just discussing the fact that bail-in did not get voted up universally. It was not fully supported at the G20, and they need another year to basically get that finalised. So the next phase of our fight against bail-in, and more importantly, to bring in Glass-Steagall regulations to stop the banks being too big to fail.
And an economic recovery for the world.
Exactly. Is this newspaper, which we've just published this week, is the next phase of our fight. And as you can see from the headline, the system is collapsing. Australia, UK must join BRICS in new economic order. There's one singular mission in this paper, and that is Australia has to join with the BRICS Alliance of Nations, which is broader than just those countries that are signified in the acronym. And there's other nations like Argentina and Egypt that are orienting to it and many more. But what are the chances of Australia joining with this bloc?
Well, the chances are the same as our chances of political success. It's something that is definitely in the interest of Australia, and it's just if the Australian people see that and demand it, then it should be good. And I will say, the fight that has erupted over Australia joining the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which China invited us to join, which we didn't under orders from the United States. That fight shows you that there is a very strong current in Australia that does want to do this, right? They're the ones that are outraged at the way America was so heavy-handed in ordering us not to, and the fact that it shows we don't have any real independence. So that outrage shows me that, you know, there's plenty of people that see this as the reality that we need to be part of, and of course, and they shouldn't see it from the standpoint, oh well, China's so big we can't really say no. No. They should look at what China's saying, because what China's offering us is, as the President of China said in his speech, win-win development. It really is in our interest to do this.
This was the speech of the Chinese President to the Australian Parliament, which I wanted to take up next because the G20 meeting was the chance for Australians to get a bit more insight into another angle, another perspective on what China wants, as you said. And India as well, with the state visits of the Chinese President and the Indian Prime Minister. But what was also very notable was the difference in the way those two leaders were treated as opposed to President Putin, the Russian president, who happens to be one of the other leaders of that BRICS grouping. So of course what we saw were the threats to Putin, direct threats from Prime Minister Tony Abbott. He demanded an apology over MH17. That became the big issue, blaming Russia. And a
full-on media, Murdoch media demonisation campaign.
That's right.
They really want to turn Putin into the next Hitler in our minds, and they just pull out all the stops to do it.
The UK Prime Minister David Cameron, before he arrived here at the G20, did just that, compared Russia to Nazi Germany. You had the big beat-up in the media that I'm sure you all heard about the Russian warships that were converging on Australian borders in international waters.
We're about to be bombed, I'm sure.
And then the British Prime Minister, when he did arrive, gave a press conference with Tony Abbott. This was on the Friday, the 14th November, in which they both described Russia as a bully and blamed it for the MH17 tragedy. And this is what Abbott said. He said, Russia would be so much more attractive if it was aspiring to be a superpower for peace and freedom and prosperity.
Like they are.
If it was trying to be a superpower for ideas and for values, like the US maybe.
Like invading Iraq on lies of weapons of mass destruction and the right to regime change any country you feel like, and the right to impose free trade on every country in the world so your multinationals can loot them. That's what he talked. That's what Abbott means by all that, of course.
Instead of trying to recreate the lost glories of Tsarism or the old Soviet Union.
And this is the man who restored knighthoods to Australia. What lost glories is he trying to recreate, Elisa?
Exactly. So, I mean, what Russia is doing within the BRICS is it is using itself as a superpower to promote peace and freedom and prosperity and economic development, even more importantly, as the basis for that.
Yeah, and your point at the beginning was dead on. We treated Putin, different from Xi and Modi, whereas Xi and Modi are his strongest supporters for the stance Russia has taken in Eastern Europe and everywhere around the world. And so we can't have it both ways.
No.
The BRICS represents the fact that the majority of the world, not the minority, the majority look at this whole situation completely different than this elitist Anglo-American Wall Street, London imperial view that we get poured into our brains through the Murdoch press.
Exactly, and the BRICS leaders did take the opportunity of all being together at the G20 to have a meeting on November the 15th. And so all this talk about Putin being isolated and showing him in the picture at the end of the, right on the edge of the official G20 photos is just nonsense.
And by the way, just quickly before we break, if you go by the Australian press reporting of the G20, all you would think was yes, Xi, Modi and Putin, but otherwise David Cameron, Stephen Harper, Barack Obama and Australia. And that's only about 7 countries or 8 countries. There's 20 countries there, right? But of course they don't feature in our racist media. They're non-entities, they don't count. And because the majority of those countries see the world completely different to this little Five Eyes, 5-country alliance of Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American countries, which are really the powers trying to blow up the world at the moment.
So we'll keep talking about this after this short break. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So we've been talking about the state visits around the G20 to Australia of particularly the Chinese Prime Minister and the Indian, the Chinese President and the Indian Prime Minister. Now we want to talk about their 2 speeches, but also the speech that David Cameron made to the Parliament. Can you say something?
This illustrates, Elisa, Australia's schizophrenic attitude to the Asia Pacific at the moment, because all the viewers will understand when I talk about, we've been told we're orienting to Asia, etc. So here we had scheduled 2 landmark speeches on the Monday and Tuesday from Xi and Modi, and then snuck in on the Friday, for which Parliament was recalled especially, which would have been a very expensive exercise. David Cameron's given a chance to speak to the Parliament. His speech was disgusting, because the whole thrust of his speech, apart from a pack of lies about terrorism, whatever, was an undisguised attack on China, as if China is illegitimate in what it does. He called it authoritarian capitalism, and he accused China of taking shortcuts to prosperity. And what he meant by that is they're doing it in this authoritarian way, not the democratic way that we British showed the world how it should be done. And I just fell over, vomiting, because 300 years of British capitalism, you go and poll the world what that was like, right? And the word authoritarian doesn't cut it when it comes to what the British did. They gave the world terms like gunboat diplomacy. So that was disgusting, but the fact Abbott scheduled that ahead of these other 2 speeches, to me was like, what's he trying to do, stain the red carpet that we're going to roll out? And that's something that we've got to fight to change in Australia.
But despite that slight on China, the Chinese president, when he spoke, was still very, very open, because he's been promoting his policy, the Silk Road, the whole BRICS agenda, as being inclusive. Everyone's invited. So he invited Australia particularly to participate in the 21st century maritime Silk Road, right?
That's the point. He said it's a natural extension. Oceania is a natural extension of the ancient maritime Silk Road, and China welcomes Australia's participation in the 21st century maritime Silk Road. And he kept calling it, he said, China is dedicated to upholding peace. There is only one trend in today's world, and that is the trend of peace and development and win-win cooperation. And
that China is not a threat to anyone, which he expressed very eloquently. Now, the Indian Prime Minister, Modi, he addressed the Parliament as well, of course, and he talked a lot about the prospects of Australian-Indian cooperation and said Australia is at the crossroads in this Asian-Pacific Indian Ocean region. Now, he also spoke in Sydney, though, at a major event within the Indian community, which there were over 20,000 people there. Now, we're going to show a quick clip of this, because we had organisers out the front getting out our literature on the BRICS to let Australians know what Modi's intersecting here.
And this clip was taken by the Indian online publication called Indian Monitor. So this was for showing on YouTube in India.
Should Australia join BRICS? There is an already IMF, Asian Development Bank. Why?
We need to grow our economy, and at the moment we're aligned to the British and the American system, with collapsing economies. The BRICS economies are growing. That's what we need. We need infrastructure, we need development, not the collapsing transatlantic system, which is based on more free trade, privatisation, big multinationals, rather than infrastructure for the good of the people.
And Modi is for the good of the common man, and he's out-American the Americans in terms of the founding fathers and establishing principles based on the common good general welfare of the common people, elevate them. And he's got massive infrastructure projects planned, 100 new modern cities for India, and collaborating with China and Russia in a space program. And
is it Asian Development Bank restricting some projects, saying, I mean, they come back with all those, the ecological problem, all those things, they are now stipulating.
So putting people first is the priority.
Okay.
Trees and ants can't put people first. We've got to do that, and we got that choice. See, we're not an animal, we're a human being, and we have creativity, and it's in our nature that we advance our civilization.
All right. What's your name, sir?
Steve.
Steve.
The transatlantic system, financial system, is anti-development, and Modi, China, and Russia, and the BRICS countries are all pro-development, and they're not looking for a profit. They're looking to develop a country for their people, and that's why Australia should come on board, and we collectively can raise the world out of this recession or depression we're in, and develop man for the future, then go into space.
Do you think Australia should have a branch of BRICS if Australia joins? Because China has taken the headquarters. India is the first president. If Australia joins, what do you think, sir? If Australia joins, should there be headquarters here, or a regional country headquarters, or a branch, or what will it benefit Australia, in what way it will benefit?
I think we should work as a cooperative with these fellow countries. I'm just for it for the common good. I'm here supporting the CEC in their fight to get Australia to join the BRICS, and I think it's for the common good. So
Thank you.
question's better referred back to Jeremy.
Can all the five of you tell one very important reason that Australia should join BRICS?
Love of mankind.
That's great. Is it reverberating? Why other voices are not coming?
Love of mankind,
Okay.
for the common
Future of mankind.
Oh, is it? You think so? Okay, that's great.
So you can see that really captures the enthusiasm of the people there, not just us who were being interviewed, but the interviewer himself, was enthusiastic about our being there because they are enthusiastic about what Modi represents, and our part is making them all aware that Modi again is not operating as India being an isolated country, but this alliance with the BRICS is changing the whole world.
That's right, and Australia needs to be a part of that. That's our singular message over the coming period. Call us to get a copy of this New Citizen. We'll send you a free copy to have a look at. And of course, we need people to get tons of them out throughout their local communities, get them to their political leaders. Most Australians do not have a concept, even within the Indian and Chinese communities, of what this BRICS alliance means for the world, and how this is really the only way, combined with Glass-Steagall laws, etc., that we can get the global financial system reorganised. So contact us. Thanks for tuning in to the CEC Report, and we'll see you again next week for more.